He took her love for granted until his enemy claimed her. The Patmore Chronicles. Dear readers, there are truths high society prefers to ignore, though all are perfectly aware of them. Unvalued love is like a sweet left out in the sun. It inevitably spoils, and when one finally recognizes the waste, it is already too late to recover its original flavor. This humble chronicler, ever attentive to the whispers of candlelit salons and the muffled sighs behind delicate fans, observes with particular interest the curious case of the Viscount of Beaumont and Miss Sabrina Morrissey. Those well-informed insist that a lady's heart possesses limits, unseen yet absolute. One is compelled to ask, what transpires when a gentleman, unwittingly, crosses the line separating devotion from indifference? For while some men cherish their treasures, others recognize them only when they find them in a rival's hands. Your devoted observer of imprudent hearts, Tom Patmore. The London season of 1815 began with its customary pomp. Balls that stretched until dawn, presentations at court that sealed destinies, and that invisible tension hovering over Mayfair like the scent of roses in an enclosed garden. Beautiful, yet suffocating. Douglas Scott, Viscount of Beaumont, crossed the Ashford. Ballroom with the assurance of one born to that world. Perhaps, dear readers, we shall soon discover that love taken for granted is, of all wagers, the most perilous. Tall, broad-shouldered, with features matchmaking mammas described as aristocratically perfect, he possessed everything society prized, a respectable title, a considerable fortune, and that carefully cultivated indifference gentlemen wore as though it were a virtue. At 28, Douglas had mastered the salons with mathematical precision. He greeted whom he must, danced just enough to avoid rudeness, and kept conversation safely superficial. In every respect, he was the flawless model of a gentleman of the high Regency. And then there was Sabrina. Sabrina Morrissey stood near the French windows, as she always did. Dressed in pale blue silk that accentuated her blue eyes and red hair, she held an ivory fan in delicate fingers, surveying the crowd with that serene expression everyone knew, and which Douglas, in his unconscious arrogance, had failed to truly see for years. She was 24. Pretty enough to attract glances, intelligent enough not to waste words, and, unlike the young debutantes who laughed too loudly and fluttered their fans with affectation, Sabrina possessed a rare quality. She knew how to wait. Douglas approached her unhurriedly, inclining his head in polite greeting. "Miss Morrissey?" His voice was courteous but devoid of warmth. "Are you alone this evening?" Sabrina lifted her eyes to him, and for a brief instant, just one, something passed through her gaze. It was not hurt, nor anger. It was subtler, more dangerous, weariness. "My mother is conversing with Lady Hemans," she replied, her voice as gentle as ever. "And my brother is, I imagine, debating politics in the card-room." Douglas nodded, as though the answer confirmed what he had already assumed. "Then I shall claim the next dance. It would be discourteous to leave you without a partner." There was no question in his tone, no expectation of refusal. It was simply what always happened. Douglas appeared, Sabrina accepted, and the dance unfolded like a ritual choreographed by years of habit. But this time, Sabrina hesitated. It was only a second, a pause so brief anyone else might have ignored it. But Douglas, though emotionally negligent, was not foolish. He noticed. "Sabrina!" She blinked, as if returning from somewhere far away, and smiled. Not the radiant smile he vaguely recalled from their youth, but one that was polite, controlled. "Of course, Lord Beaumont. It would be an honor." He offered his arm. She took it, and as they walked toward the dance floor, Douglas felt something unfamiliar, a faint unease he could not name, as though the ground beneath his feet were not as solid as it had always seemed. 3 days later, Douglas sent a note. Miss Morrissey, I hope to find you at the Hyde Park Promenade tomorrow at 5 o'clock. There is a matter I wish to discuss. Respectfully, Beaumont. Sabrina read the note at her writing desk, in the soft morning light filtering through her Mayfair bedroom windows. Her fingers traced the elegant, impersonal script she knew so well. There was no please, no if it suits you, only the assumption that she would be there, and the saddest part of all, she probably would be. Her companion, Mrs. Justina Hartwell, observed her from the corner of the room while folding shawls. "Another note from the Viscount?" she asked, her tone neutral, her eyes keen. "Yes. And will you go?" Sabrina did not answer at once. Instead, she set the paper down and walked to the window, gazing at the bustling streets of Mayfair, where elegant carriages carried the elite from one social obligation to the next. "I always do, don't I, Justina?" Mrs. Hartwell set the shawl aside and approached her. "You always have, my dear. But nothing is written in stone, not even devotion." Sabrina turned, her eyes shining with something suspiciously close to restrained tears. "When did I become so predictable? When you began loving a man who never learned to value gifts." The words lingered in the air like ash after a fire. The next day, Sabrina arrived at Hyde Park precisely at 5. Douglas arrived at 1:30, with a vague excuse about parliamentary matters. He did not even notice that she had waited alone for 30 minutes under society's curious gaze. They walked in silence for a time, her arm resting lightly upon his, a gesture so habitual neither truly felt it anymore. "There is a dinner at the Waverleys' residence next week," Douglas said, as though commenting on the weather. "It would be appropriate for you to attend." "Appropriate?" Sabrina kept her eyes forward. "Yes, there will be important people. My presence is expected and mine serves to complete the picture." Douglas stopped, frowning slightly. "I do not understand why you are being so peculiar." She looked at him then, truly looked, and Douglas felt the unsettling sensation of being assessed and somehow found wanting. "Peculiar," she repeated, testing the word. "Is that the one you choose?" "Sabrina, if something is wrong—" "There is nothing wrong, Lord Beaumont," she said, her voice perfectly controlled. "I shall attend the Waverleys' dinner, if that is what you wish to know." He visibly relaxed. "Excellent. Then it is settled." But nothing was settled. And for the first time in years, Sabrina Morrissey allowed herself to contemplate the unthinkable. What if she simply stopped waiting? The Duchess of Ashford's Ball. The Duchess of Ashford's Ball was the most anticipated event of the season, a display of wealth, power, and influence, where reputations were made or destroyed in a single night. Sabrina arrived with her mother, Lady Morrissey, a pragmatic woman who had long accepted that her daughter would never be an aggressive husband hunter like the other young ladies of society. "Where is Beaumont?" Lady Morrissey asked, surveying the room with experienced eyes. "Likely debating tariffs with some parliamentarian," Sabrina replied without emotion. Her mother gave her a sharp look. "You are different lately." "I am tired, Mama." He was entirely absorbed, emphatic gestures, brow furrowed in concentration, when his eyes, out of habit, searched for Sabrina. She was where she always was, near the windows, conversing politely with Lady Hemans. Satisfied upon locating her, Douglas returned to his discussion. But this time something was different. Sabrina did not wait. When the first waltz began, the one Douglas always reserved for her, though he never formally asked, Sabrina accepted the hand of another gentleman, Lord Edmund Leinster, a middle-aged baron of impeccable reputation. Douglas noticed. It was not jealousy exactly, more irritation. That is all. Tired of waiting, I imagine? Sabrina did not answer. There was no need. Across the ballroom, Douglas was engaged in animated conversation with Lord Leinster about an upcoming parliamentary vote. A disruption of routine, like a servant moving an object from its usual place, leaving one to search for it for a few seconds longer than expected. He watched her glide across the floor, her lavender gown creating elegant whirlwinds. Leinster was polite, respectful, but utterly unremarkable. Douglas dismissed the scene from his mind. When the dance ended, he moved to approach her. But Sabrina was already engaged in conversation with Mrs. Hartwell and two other ladies. Without looking at him, without seeking him. The second waltz passed, then the third. Douglas danced mechanically with Lady Thornfield, then with the Duke of Somerset's daughter, social obligations fulfilled with automatic efficiency. Yet his eyes kept returning to Sabrina, and then finally he saw. Sabrina stood alone on the terrace, gazing at the lantern-lit gardens. Her shoulders were slightly curved, not in defeat, but in something subtler. Relief, perhaps. As though being alone were strangely less lonely than being with him. Douglas approached, stopping beside her. "You danced with Leinster?" It was not a question. He asked. It would have been rude to refuse. "You never refuse when I ask." She turned to him, and for the first time Douglas saw something new in her eyes. Not anger, not hurt, but something infinitely more dangerous. Clarity. "You did not ask, Douglas. You never ask. You simply assume." Hearing his given name, without title, without formality, felt strangely intimate between them. "I do not understand what has been happening with you lately." "No," she agreed softly. "You truly do not." She turned back to the gardens, lantern light dancing across her face. "For years I have been exactly where you expected me to be. Always available, always waiting, always there. And you never had to do anything to deserve it. Sabrina." "But for the first time," she continued, her voice still calm but firm, "I am asking myself, why?" Douglas opened his mouth, but no words came. For the first time in his comfortable, predictable life, he had no answer. Sabrina inclined her head in a courteous farewell. "Good evening, Lord Beaumont." And then she returned inside, leaving him alone on the terrace. For the first time, Douglas felt something he had never expected to feel regarding Sabrina Morrissey: fear. That same night, while Mayfair's elite waltzed beneath crystal chandeliers, James Spencer worked late in his confectionery, preparing orders for the week's events. Tall, with skillful hands and observant eyes, James Spencer was not merely an exceptional confectioner, he was a natural observer. And in Mayfair, observation was a currency more valuable than gold. That night, James sat down to write another of his gossip column. For the first time, Sabrina imagined what it might be like not to be invisible. The Patmore Chronicles. Esteemed readers, the wise say that the greatest tragedy lies not in losing what one loves, but in discovering, too late, that one never knew how to value it. This chronicler observes with renewed interest certain events unfolding in our city's salons. When a gentleman awakens to the worth of what he has always possessed, he often discovers that another already stands ready to recognize the neglected treasure. And what a suitor! Old rivalries have a peculiar habit of resurfacing at the most inconvenient moments. Coincidence? This chronicler believes there are no coincidences in matters of the heart, only opportunity and vengeance elegantly disguised as courtesy. Faithfully observing the turns of fate, Tom Patmore Julian Taylor arrived in London on a grey April afternoon. His carriage stopped at Berkeley Square, not ostentatious like the ducal mansions, but respectable for a gentleman of considerable fortune. No one in Mayfair expected his return. Julian had spent 3 years in Scotland, far from London's salons. But business had brought him back, and perhaps something more. Sabrina saw him first during tea at Lady Hemans's home. "Allow me to introduce Mr. Julian Taylor, newly arrived from Scotland." Sabrina lifted her gaze and met a man with dark hair touched with silver at the temples and storm-grey eyes. There was something different about him. Not arrogance, but presence, as though every movement were deliberate. "Miss Morrissey," Julian bowed elegantly. "Lady Hemans mentioned that you possess remarkable knowledge of botany." Sabrina blinked, surprised. It was rare for anyone to mention her true interests. "My knowledge is merely amateur. I cultivate roses on my Scottish estate. It would be an honor to hear your thoughts." And thus began a conversation that stretched through the afternoon. Julian did not merely listen, he heard. He asked thoughtful questions, remembered details. Later, Mrs. Hartwell revealed, he and Lord Beaumont are long-standing rivals, land disputes, legal battles. They never reconciled. Sabrina felt a flicker of curiosity. Rivalry? How interesting. In the days that followed, Julian became a constant presence at social events, always courteous, always near Sabrina. At Lady Thornfield's musical evening, he remarked on the piano performance, "You did not applaud. The pianist rushed the tempo, you noticed. You deserve attention." It was simple, yet meaningful. For years, Sabrina had received everything except attention. At the next Hyde Park promenade, Julian appeared astride a magnificent black stallion. Upon spotting Sabrina walking with Mrs. Hartwell near the Serpentine, he dismounted at once, handing the reins to a servant. "Miss Morrissey, what a pleasant coincidence." He bowed with elegant ease. "Mrs. Hartwell, always a pleasure." Her companion inclined her head with a knowing smile and discreetly stepped a few paces away, granting them privacy within the bounds of social propriety. "Mr. Taylor." Sabrina found herself strangely aware of his presence. "Your horse is truly magnificent. One rarely sees an animal of such stature and temperament." "Thank you. I brought him directly from Scotland." He stroked the horse's glossy neck with affectionate familiarity. "Shadow and I have a long history together. Do you ride, Miss Morrissey?" "Not for several years. My father had an Arabian mare I adored from childhood, but she passed away 3 years ago, and I—" Sabrina hesitated, surprised at herself for revealing something so personal. "I never found another that felt right. It sounds foolish, I know." "It is not foolish at all," Julian replied, his voice carrying genuine conviction. "I understand perfectly. Some bonds, especially those formed in youth, are not easily replaced. There is a trust, a silent language between rider and horse that transcends mere training." Sabrina looked at him, moved by the understanding in his words. Douglas would never have grasped such a thing. He saw horses as tools, conveyances, symbols of status. "Perhaps," Julian continued, his grey eyes meeting hers, "when you are ready, I might introduce you to a few mares on my Highland estate. There is one in particular whom I believe you would appreciate. Not to replace your lost companion, never that, but to begin again. A new chapter." The word lingered between them, heavy with double meaning. Begin again. Sabrina felt something stir in her chest. Not the sweeping passion of the novels she secretly read, but something equally dangerous to her carefully ordered life. Possibility. The possibility of being seen, of being chosen, of being valued not as a convenient certainty, but as a person of inherent worth. That would be "Very pleasant," she replied, allowing a genuine smile to touch her lips for the first time in weeks. And when Julian smiled in return, a true smile that reached his grey eyes and warmed them with something close to admiration, Sabrina understood a simple yet profound truth. For the first time in years, someone truly saw her. Not as a convenient presence at balls, not as a guaranteed certainty, not as an appropriate social ornament, but as a person with preferences, memories, sorrows, and intrinsic value. Across the park, partially obscured by an ancient oak, astride his own bay horse, Douglas Scott watched the scene with a growing and deeply unsettling sensation he could not properly name. It was not jealousy, or so he tried to convince himself, but something more complex. As though the ground beneath his feet, once so solid and predictable, had developed invisible fissures whose dangerous depth was only now becoming apparent. Douglas was not a man prone to uncontrolled emotion. He prided himself on his rationality, his ability to assess situations with cool logic. But watching Julian Taylor speak with Sabrina, seeing her smile with that genuine warmth he had long ceased to inspire, awakened something primitive in his chest. It was not jealousy. It could not be. Jealousy implied possessiveness, and Douglas had always believed his relationship with Sabrina existed beyond such trivial emotions. They understood one another. There was an implicit agreement, unofficial, yet utterly real in his mind, or so he had believed all those years of comfortable certainty. That evening, at White's Club, Douglas found himself in conversation with the Earl of Ashford, his oldest friend, and regrettably his most forthright. "You seem unsettled," Ashford observed, pouring brandy with practiced ease. "Taylor has returned. He is courting Sabrina quite deliberately." A heavy silence followed. "And that troubles you because Sabrina and I have an understanding. We always have." "Do you?" Ashford's words were sharp as a blade. "When was the last time you truly spoke with her? Asked about her interests, her thoughts?" "That is not fair," Douglas protested, though his voice sounded weak even to his own ears. "Is it not?" Ashford leaned back, studying him with eyes that had seen too much. "You assumed her affection was perpetual, that it would always be there, like the air you breathe, requiring neither cultivation nor care. And now that someone offers her genuine attention, you are surprised?" The words struck Douglas like physical blows because they were irrefutably true. And what if it is too late? The question escaped him before he could stop it, raw and vulnerable in a way Douglas rarely allowed. Ashford regarded him for a long moment, his gaze piercing, yet not without compassion. "Then, my friend, you will have learned a lesson few men of our position are ever forced to face, that unvalued love does not last forever, that patience has limits, and that Julian Taylor, your greatest rival in every other arena, has been infinitely wiser than you in recognizing a treasure when he finally saw one." He paused deliberately. "The real question, Douglas, is not whether it is too late. It is whether you are finally willing to fight for something you always believed was guaranteed." Douglas left the club with a weight in his chest he could not name. Regret, fear, and despair. As his carriage rolled through Mayfair, he thought of Sabrina with painful clarity, how she had always waited, how her smile had become polite, controlled, how he had never asked about her books, her opinions, her dreams. And now Julian Taylor was doing everything Douglas never had, not because he was better, but because he cared. The carriage stopped at Grosvenor Square. Douglas descended but remained standing, staring at the illuminated windows. For the first time in years he felt something that transcended wounded pride, a genuine fear of losing something irreplaceable. a visceral fear of finally understanding the value of something precious, only to discover it was already in another man's hands. A man who knew exactly what to do with a treasure. Douglas had always believed he could lose to Julian in any contest, except the one he had never imagined he would need to fight. The Patmore Chronicles. Dearest readers, there are those who believe love to be a matter of destiny. This chronicler, however, after years of observing imprudent hearts and belated decisions, dares to disagree. Love, dear readers, is above all a choice, repeated, conscious, and, most importantly, demonstrated. Some learn this lesson early, others, regrettably, only when there is nothing left to save. And there are those rare moments when life, in its infinite irony, offers not punishment, but an unexpected reward to those who finally learn to choose themselves. May we be permitted, in this final chronicle, to witness one such moment. Ever attentive to endings few foresee, Tom Patmore Sabrina Morrissey awoke that morning with an unfamiliar sensation. Lightness. There was no urgency in her thoughts, no silent knot in her chest that had become a constant companion for so many years. Sunlight filtered through the linen curtains, and for the first time in a very long while, she did not think about where she ought to be or who others expected her to become. She thought only of herself. In the days following the Duchess of Ashford's ball, her routine shifted subtly yet irrevocably. Invitations continued to arrive. Dinners, musicales, promenades, but now they carried something new, genuine anticipation. Not the expectation of fulfilling a role, but of participating. Julian Taylor became a steady presence, though never an intrusive one. He did not appear demanding attention. He appeared offering companionship. He did not presume, he asked. He did not lead. He walked beside her. At an intimate luncheon at Lady Hemans's home, while discussing the latest news from Scotland, Sabrina casually mentioned a French botanical book she had read years earlier. The next day, Julian arrived with the volume in hand. "I found a copy at a bookshop near the Strand," he said, as though it were nothing remarkable. "I remembered your enthusiasm when you mentioned it." She held the book carefully, feeling something tighten in her throat. It was not the object itself, but the gesture. He had listened, remembered, cared. "No one has ever remembered such things," she murmured, more to herself than to him. Julian looked at her with calm attention. "Then it is time you grow accustomed to it, because I intend to remember them all." Those words, spoken without grandiosity, altered something fundamental within her. Meanwhile, Douglas Scott watched from a distance, each new smile from Sabrina a silent confirmation of his own neglect. He tried, he truly did, to mend what had been broken. He sent flowers, wrote longer notes than he ever had before, requested meetings, finally using the word please. But there was something profoundly wrong with his efforts. They were reactive, not transformative. When he finally encountered Sabrina alone, during a morning walk in the Kensington Gardens, she listened with serene courtesy. "I was wrong," Douglas said, his voice heavy with belated sincerity. "I was always wrong to presume. You were always there, and I never realized how much that meant." Sabrina took a deep breath before answering. "No, Douglas, you did notice. You simply never considered that you might lose." There was no cruelty in her words, only truth. "I can change," he insisted, desperation edging his voice. "Give me a chance." She looked at him for a long moment, and in her gaze there was compassion, not love. "We can all change. But I am not the one who must pay the price for your learning." It was then that Douglas finally understood. He had not lost Sabrina to Julian. He had lost her long before, to his own indifference. and Sabrina, as she walked away, felt something unexpected: peace. The invitation to visit Julian's estate in Scotland arrived weeks later, carefully worded, free of presumption. If you wish, when you feel ready. She wished. She was ready. The journey was long, but beautiful. Green hills stretched as far as the eye could see. The air was purer, and the silence soothing. At Julian's estate, Sabrina felt something she had never known in Mayfair: belonging without expectation. She rode again for the first time in years, atop a gentle chestnut mare. She laughed when she lost her balance. She wept quietly at memories of childhood. Julian was beside her through it all, not to lead, but to support. One afternoon, wrapped in soft mist, they walked among ancient rose bushes. Sabrina paused before one, touching its petals with care. "Do you truly tend all of this yourself?" she asked. "Not alone," Julian replied. "With patience, with daily attention. Some roses bloom quickly, others take years, but all require constant care." She smiled, understanding what he left unsaid. It was there, without music, without witnesses, without any need for spectacle, that Julian took her hand. "Sabrina, I do not see you as a conquest," he said, his voice steady and calm. "I see you as a choice, and if you allow me, I want to choose you every day, not because I must, but because I want to." The tears that fell were not born of accumulated pain, but of recognition. For the first time, someone did not want her out of convenience, habit, or appearance. He wanted her wholly. "I spent so long waiting to be chosen," she confessed, "that I almost forgot to choose myself." "Then that is where we begin," Julian said, tightening his hold on her hand. "Together, if you wish." She wished. Their return to London brought murmurs, as always. Comments surfaced. Comparisons were made. But Sabrina moved through the drawing rooms with a different bearing now. No longer waiting, no longer invisible. When the engagement was announced, quietly, without ostentation, even the most skeptical conceded. There was something undeniably solid about that union. At the final ball of the season, Sabrina entered the ballroom at Julian's side, not as someone completing an image, but as someone being celebrated. He did not leave her standing alone by the windows, not because he feared losing her, but because he genuinely wished to be with her. Douglas watched from a distance, in silent acceptance. It hurt, but it was a deserved pain. As they danced, Julian leaned close and murmured, "Are you happy?" Sabrina rested her head against his shoulder, her smile serene. "I am. Because for the first time, I did not have to wait." And so, dear readers, this chronicle ends not with regret, but with choice. For the true happy ending does not belong to those who learn too late, but to those who finally understand their own worth and find someone who recognizes it from the very beginning. Ever attentive to loves that bloom when least expected, Tom Patmore.